Okay, continuing our study of the book of 1 Samuel. Last week we talked about 1 Samuel 4, and today we're going to talk about 5 through 8 perhaps. But I want to, perhaps, somebody laughed. We may or we may not get through even part of that. We may not get past 4. Last week we were talking about a big mistake that the nation of Israel made in their response to the threat of the Philistines. Remember, they felt the oppression of the Philistines. They were full of fear because they were being invaded. And what was their response? Their response was, well, let's go get the Ark of the Covenant and we'll use that and we'll march that out before them and we will be victorious. And they must have been thinking, well, you know, old Joshua did that in his time and he was totally successful in his campaign against Jericho, so we'll do the same thing. And we'll have the same result. Well, did they have the same result? No, not even close. They were beaten down. And so I think that lesson, and really part of what we talk about today in the other chapters, calls us to focus upon the object of one's faith. And we see an error in the nation of Israel at that time as to what the object of their faith was. What did they place their hope in at the time? In chapter 4, the object of their faith was what?
The ark.
The physical Ark of the Covenant. Not what the Ark represented. They were basically placing their faith and confidence in that which was built by man, the physical Ark itself, and not what it represented, which was the presence of God. And God was the one, obviously, who gave the instructions, the details, the skill, if you will, to build the Ark of the Covenant. He said how it was to be built. He described how it was to be treated. He described where it was to be placed. He described what was to be done with it. He described who was to approach the Ark of the Covenant. And sure enough, in Joshua's time, God did give the instruction that the Ark of the Covenant would be marched around the city of Jericho. And Joshua and Israel was successful, but only because why? They were absolutely obedient to the instruction, the specific instruction that God gave them. We see here, God did not give the Israelites instructions to take the Ark of the Covenant out before the Philistines. They didn't have the proper object of their faith, which raises a question for us. What should the proper object of our faith be? And when we discussed that in some detail last time, I want to make sure that we've discussed that to the full extent that we should. And last time we talked about what is faith and the fact that every human being has faith in something. Jackie brought up the subject matter, well, what is saving faith, which is a very important question. You don't have saving faith unless you have a proper object of your faith. And human beings throughout history have been famous for having the wrong object of their faith. And the Bible is full of accounts of failures concerning the object of one's faith. One of the first examples I thought of had to do with Cain and Abel and the sacrifices they brought. Remember, Cain brought an unacceptable sacrifice. Abel's sacrifice was acceptable to God. What was the difference between the two? What was the nature of Cain's sacrifice?
The condition of their heart.
It was the condition of their heart, but particularly the sacrifice that they brought represented the condition of their heart. What did Cain bring? He brought something that he had raised in his field. He brought grain, he brought fruits or whatever. In other words, something that he had produced through his own efforts. Okay, basically saying, look what I've done, God. I'm bringing you something. I did a good job. I got these beautiful vegetables. I got this beautiful wheat. I'm bringing you the works of my hands. No. What did Abel bring? Abel brought a sacrificed bloody animal, really representing, I think, the condition of his heart, what he was feeling. He should be slain. He deserved to have his blood shed. In other words, he came with a heart of contrition, whereas Cain came with a heart of pride. Okay, but the whole point was that Cain, the object of Cain's faith was what? What he did. Okay, the works of his hands, his own efforts. Do we do that today? Well, we really do. I think about some of the errors that we make. Even today, sometimes we think that that the works of the flesh, the works of our hands, are the object of our faith. In other words, certain things that we do, we think they make us right or in better standing before God. For example, today I brought a $10,000 offering and I put it in the collection plate. If I say, good me, God is going to count me righteous for that, what does God say? No, that is the works of your hands.
He's given us these things.
That's right. That's exactly right. That's
Start
right.
off with.
There's
We're not
nothing.
giving him anything that he hadn't given us.
That's right. There's nothing wrong and there's everything right about bringing your tithe, but it is a tithe of humility. It is recognizing, as Kenny said, God has blessed me and I'm honoring God by bringing my tithe, bringing my offering to Him. I don't bring it claiming, oh, look at me, God. This makes me righteous. Same way, I spent 10 hours studying my Bible this week. Okay, nothing wrong with studying the Bible, unless we say that's what makes us righteous before God. Say, I spent 10 hours in prayer this week, Lord. Good for me. No, works of the flesh, if we're relying upon that for our righteousness. Lord, I went to church 3 times this week, sang all the hymns, read all the Bible verses. I came to church and I cleaned up, I worked, I did this, I did that. Nothing wrong with those things, but we don't rely upon those things as our righteousness. There's only one thing that makes us righteous in the eyes of God, and that is what? The finished work of Christ. That we trust that what Christ did for us was enough. And He is the one who has given us righteousness. We wear the cloak of righteousness, not because we earned it, but because He gave it to us. And that's what God accepts. That's the only thing that He accepts. And the scriptures are full of examples of those kind of things. Cain and Abel is merely one. I thought about also Abraham. And that in the context of the covenant. You recall in Genesis chapter 12, God called Abraham. And one of the things He told Abraham, He said, in you all of the nations of the earth shall be blessed. What a tremendous thing that was. What did He mean by that? In Abraham, in you, all the nations of the earth shall be blessed. In what sense? That's right. You are a progenitor of Christ, the Savior. And that's the only thing that was of value to Abraham. In Genesis chapter 15, remember Abraham was thinking, he said, I'm an old man. I don't have any children. He's thinking about maybe one of his servants, a child of his servant would be his heir. And God said, oh, no. You're going to have an heir who's going to be of your own body, of your own flesh. And God made a promise to him. And then later on, Abraham says, how shall I know that this is true? And God says, all right, I'll make a covenant with you. And so they made a covenant. And it said that Abraham believed God and it was reckoned to him as righteousness. So Abraham was righteous. Why? Because he believed God. What did he believe about it? He believed God's promise that in me all the nations of the earth would be blessed. And he believed that God would give him a son out of his own flesh. But then what happens? In chapter 16, he's waiting around, he and Sarah sitting around, well, we're getting pretty old here and don't have any kids. What are we going to do about it? And then they concocted a scheme whereby what? They would be relying upon their own flesh and not the promises of God. And we have the account where Sarah comes up with the idea. She brings to Abraham her servant girl Hagar. And again, much the same as Eve brought the apple to Adam. Adam was tempted. Abraham was tempted. He succumbed to the temptation. A son was produced, Ishmael. And did Ishmael turn out to be a blessing? Was all nations of the earth blessed through Ishmael?
No.
Not by a long shot.
All nations were cursed.
All nations were cursed as a result of what? That act of the flesh, the absence of faith. God never needed Abraham's help or idea about how to produce an heir, a son of the flesh. And God's idea was that simply Abraham would father a child, but when He spoke to Abraham, He was talking about the union of Abraham and Sarah, the two of you together. You will be the father, but Sarah will be the mother. Okay, that was His intention, not that Sarah be bypassed. And when they finally relied upon God and waited on God, then what happened? The son of promises